And we're live.
Hello, hello. And we're a minute ahead of time. We'll wait just a minute or two. Does anybody have any jokes that they know? Let me caveat that. Any good jokes?
Oh, that leaves me
I've got
out.
some dad jokes. I've got some dad jokes that I've been working on. But cool. Awesome. Jeff, you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Cool. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this exciting edition of Ask Me Anything. We're very honored to have Mr. Jeff Gavlinski as VP at Plume and also the founder of Mountain Connect. And most folks in the broadband grants community know Jeff already because he's a prolific cross-pollinator. He's been doing some really great work over the years in the broadband industry, trying to establish cross-sector partnerships, doing all kinds of wonderful stuff. So, it's a real honor, Jeff, to get some time with you. We know you're busy. We know Mountain Connect's coming up pretty fast, May 23rd to 25th, and that's taken up a lot of your time, but it's awesome that you're hanging out with us, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jace. I really appreciate the opportunity. I literally just walked in the door from the airport, so.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you that as one of my questions for you, Jeff, is like you seem to be, every time that we touch base, somebody somewhere else, right? And not just in the United States, but globally. Like, you're going around, and I think most of what you're doing is broadband partnership conversations, right? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so my role at Plume is to build thought leadership, technical thought leadership, and brand value for Plume with associations that we've deemed to be strategic around the globe. So hence the travel. And I think over time, especially when I get into Asia Pacific, we'll have probably a good 70 or so that will manage across the globe and with partners. So
awesome. Okay, yeah. So you just came off the plane minutes ago talking about a partnership. You're doing that day in and day out. I think for the first question for you, Jeff, we'd like to ask you, because you've been at this for so long and from so many different angles in the industry and broadband, if you have any advice for states, especially and policymakers that are, looking to make the most of the historic public investment coming up with the tens of billions of dollars in broadband grants and about partnerships, right? And what does it mean to be cross-sector, or do you see that like the future is like a bunch of state-owned and operated public things, that don't actually involve other sectors?
Well, I suppose my first piece of advice, which is a softball answer, but do the right thing, right? Put the money to use where it's needed. Like we have a bit of a history of that not actually transpiring in the manner in which it was intended. And so I think partnerships are going to be key going forward. If we believe that majority of this money is going to go to the municipalities who actually need it, I think forming partner, again, depending on their own strategy, but I think what we're going to see a lot of is we're going to see a lot of local communities partnering with local providers. And so, forming, if that relationship doesn't exist today, it's important to start forming a really good relationship because the value of what's being built will be reliant on that partnership.
Spot on, dude. So it's not just the communities, it's also those local providers. If you're listening in the local provider community, Jeff has been at this for a long while, has meditated on it for many moons. And it's don't wait. Don't wait on fabric or whatever they're calling it. Like don't wait. Like get to know your community that you serve, and get those partnerships lined up. Am I hearing you right, Jeff?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And I think for the industry, this is a really interesting first. Historically, funds from the federal government have been administered by the federal government, and this is the first time that we'll have sort of a layered approach to how this money gets dispersed. So from federal government to state government to local communities. And so for the industry, this is really about a multi-pronged strategy for this, especially the states that have existing broadband offices or some similar infrastructure supporting broadband efforts within their state. That it's key to know those folks. It's key to understand their strategy. How are they going to grant out
Right.
this money? And then, of course, it's also key to know where the funds are likely to go, so that you can start forming these partnerships.
Where the funds are likely to go.
Yep.
And that's key, Jeff. So that's like, the diametric opposite of advice that you hear in some groups that say, like, we're waiting on the FCC and some fabric softener, right? Like, you are saying, actually do your homework now, right? Do your own research, get to understand the problem, be prepared, right, for
Yep.
next steps, because NTIA's leadership in this thing it's the largest single day history event in the history of broadband is about to happen, right? Like the May 16th NOFO, a week ahead of your conference in the Rocky Mountains. And the NTIA has worked very hard on a model that, like you said, is layered, right? So your advice is clear and appreciated from our point of view of broadband money. That's sort of, what we try to do too, is help folks understand and get the tools and data they need to, start forming their plans. So that's awesome. I mentioned Mountain Connect briefly, but you founded Mountain Connect many years ago, like 12 years ago. Why, and what is it, and can you share a bit more about it with the community? We've posted a few things about it, but it'd be really wonderful to hear it straight from the Jeff's mouth.
Yeah, well, I've been because I've been running it for so long, I think people assume that I founded it. I actually did not found the event. It was founded by a gentleman who now works for Region 10 in Colorado. His name is Corey Brendel. So Corey formed it around our BTOP grant that we got back in 2009. So, but the conference was really, if you compare it to what we have today, it was really a sort of a day and a half seminar based on that BTOP grant's impact to the western slope of Colorado only. So most of the folks that were there outside of the state government were folks from communities on the western slope. So it kind of had a narrow focus. And jokingly, one year I went to him, I think the third year, and I said, there's more we could do with this, and we could broaden horizons. He said, well, if you want to broaden the horizons, you take it over.
What if you want to broadband the horizons, Jeff? Sorry.
Yeah. So I think the last year before I took it over, low 90 in terms of people who were there. And of course, this year we're expecting 700. So it's had quite a bit of growth. We've got folks coming in from all over the country. So a lot of times, because in the name of the event, people think it's either a Colorado focused event or it's only to serve the Rocky Mountains. Now, because we have it here in Colorado, we're always going to have, the sort of core of our audience is going to come from Colorado, but certainly we've got people from all over the country. So.
Well, I've spent a good amount of time talking to folks that have been there, and the sort of common thread, I think, of feedback about the event from folks is I've heard it described as like the most honest conversation in broadband, just because, and then we think of it as like, we look at the way you've structured it, and the interesting part is like, it's very independent, right? It's not like, Monopoly A and Monopoly B dueling for the title sponsor. It's like, it's actually like super grassroots and cross sector, right? So that in this sense, like what you're creating there, Jeff, is like, what we've heard described as like a can't miss or a must attend kind of event. And this is from folks like all up and down the Eastern Seaboard, California folks, South folks, so it's not even like exclusionary to people that live in mountains, right? So it's like super inclusive of, come from valleys, glades, lakes, terraces, plateaus, whatever. Like, you don't worry about your like sort of geo situation. You're welcome at Mountain Connect. And it's really interesting too to hear you say, Jeff, that it got its birth. It was born out of an NTIA program, right?
Yep.
Like that's really fascinating.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
12 something years in, and there's like some amazing folks from DC, some leaders coming from DC. More are going to be announced next week. To um, connect with the cross pollinator audience in Keystone, right? The week after NTIA makes history with the largest NOFO in the history of the industry, and so that's a really cool, it's almost poetic. If I was more creative, I would think of some poem on the spot about
Well,
the fact that it was born out of that, and now
yeah,
it's gonna be heavily about that. That's cool. You got a bead track too, I saw.
yeah, we do. Look, the other thing I would say about the conference is that if we're not helping the folks that actually need the help, then why are we doing this? And so my focus has always been on the sort of tier 3 and below communities, counties, telcos, WISPs, utilities, economic development, education, telehealth. Um, and by the way, if we're still talking about why broadband's important, I think we got bigger problems. And so
Yeah.
content is so key. And I've done a couple of small things. Like for the most part, you'll find that through my agenda, I don't have a lot of single person presentations. I started encouraging people and really industry folks, quite frankly, that if you want to come talk at Mountain Connect, you should bring a customer. And when I first started suggesting that, I used to get a lot of long stares at that. And so I would explain that if you think about who's in the audience, it's one thing for you to stand up there and say, well, we're the industry experts. If you do A, B, and C, you'll be successful. It's quite another if you say, we're the industry experts, you do A, B, and C. And now here's a customer who's going to stand up and say, hey, we did A, B, and C. Here's the lessons we learned. Here's perhaps what we would have done differently. It's going to resonate more with the folks in the audience because it's one of their peers up there telling that story.
Awesome, Jeff. Thank you. So that sounds like a really important time and place, coming up May 23rd to 25th, Keystone, Colorado, mountainConnect.org. Like you heard it straight from Jeff. Like you go there to, not just listen, but speak, right, and connect and make partnerships and learn from other models. And it's all walks, right? I mean, if you look at the roster, it's already a stacked roster. There's some more awesome people that'll be announced next week, but it's also like already filled with some of the broadband's best and brightest, right? If you go there and look at the speakers, and there's not like a specific industry, there's not a specific sector or segment. There are folks from the fiber industry, the wireless industry, there are practitioners, builders, operators, techies, investors, like just a cool lineup. So really appreciate that. Drew Clark from Broadband Breakfast actually asked a question kind of related to this. Can you talk a bit more about your professional interests, Jeff? Like, and what's been the driving force in your career, and why all those years ago did you say, hey, I'm going to take over on Mountain Connect and scale it by an order of magnitude and keep doing it? Because you've told me before like how much work goes into it, as framed as a labor of love. As what you described to me is like a way of giving back to the industry that has given so much to you, right? And that really stuck with me. So can we answer Drew's question on this? Like, why the hell are you doing this?
Well, some people would say I'm an idiot. It's a difficult balance, I would say, for 5 months, especially 5 months. It's difficult to try to balance doing a conference as well as working full time. It's hard on my family, as you might guess. So there's a lot of sacrifice over the years that has been broadly made across the board. But I have always felt like I needed to give something back to an industry that has given a lot to me. And I don't just say those, I don't say that idly. It is a lot of work, but it's worth it, especially as everyone's leaving. And I have some time to reflect on the previous 2 or 3 days where we've had the event. and then start getting feedback from folks. One of the other things
Nice.
that I would say is that I've always tried to create a different kind of vibe in the conference. In other words, I don't have a big trade show floor like a lot of other conferences do. As you know, I put all my exhibitors in the high foot traffic areas, and I try to keep I try to create an intimate environment, because the other really strong measure of success is someone's ability, who actually wants to learn something, to come and learn something to take away back to their community, but to also have time to network with people.
Yep.
And I think because we have a lot of break time, networking time woven into our agenda, there's a lot of time for that. There's just a lot of collaboration that goes on there. So I think that's something that's missing. And, the bigger an event gets, the harder it is to sort of keep that intimate environment. So I'm hoping that I'll never forget like where this whole thing started, and that we keep that intimate environment going forward.
Spot on, dude. So, let's transition for a few moments, Jeff. You mentioned thought leadership earlier in the discussion, and we have several questions from folks in the community around your perspective on open access. And for folks that are listening in, check out Jeff's LinkedIn, right? Let's make sure to post then on his page, his LinkedIn profile, so folks can see it. But you often like create discussions, right, that are meaningful across. They're digital reflections of your physical work, right, that you do with all the networking, and so you bring together all these perspectives. And recently you had an awesome, like super fertile, rich discussion that you prompted on LinkedIn around the topic of open access. So, there's a question from Mike in the broadband grants community. That, do you think open access will become a standard model in the United States, or will it remain a niche? And then, do you have any thoughts on that question? Like, is there a standard model? Because it sounds like from your discussion on LinkedIn, there's a bunch of different models. So,
well, that's the thing, right? There's open access is a very broad subject, right? There is open access networks where municipalities will build a core network and then lease back dark fiber on that network, in the hopes that local providers will extend off of that network to their constituents and provide better services. And then there are models like Utopia, Ammon, Idaho, Huntsville even, although Huntsville, it's kind of hard for Huntsville to claim open access when really they have one provider on network. But nonetheless, they made it more cost efficient for Google to come in and extend the fiber that they built. So what I would say in an answer to that question, I've always been a big fan of open access, but I realized along the way that it's not, if we're talking about last mile open access, it's not for everybody, nor should it be, right? I think there's some compelling reasons why a municipality should consider open access. But I'm not going to sit here and suggest that we're going to see a plethora of open access networks being built in this country. Why? I think because we've got entrenched, long-standing companies that have tried to build a business around, whether they're a telco or they're a large incumbent. They're going to have some influence, and where they're providing services it's an uphill battle to build over the top of that, and then invite other providers to come in and compete against them.
In that scenario, Jeff, is it a battle worth fighting, right? If that incumbent, if that monopoly, and it hasn't historically delivered, is open access a potential model that a way that communities and local providers can sort of team up to fill the gaps where those incumbents have failed? Or are you saying like don't try to take on open access if there's like a really strong local monopoly, because they're just going to try to crush you?
Well, it's interesting. As you've talked about with the speed funding, here's a really good opportunity to build more open access solutions, um, because it'll be funded through obviously through the money that's coming. So it significantly will reduce the cost of infrastructure, right? Which, as we all know, is the biggest hurdle in building
Huge.
networks. And so why would I don't care if you're Comcast or you're AT&T, why would you not take advantage of that? And oftentimes the answer is that they want to maintain control over the entire network, from the edge all the way into their core. So as much as I understand that, I think that's one of the other reasons why the larger incumbent monopoly companies won't do it. So
I got you. So they probably won't take it on, but maybe the community teaming up with local providers could find a kind of strategy, right? In some flavor of open access. And I mentioned your LinkedIn discussion, and you were careful when different groups were weighing in on their perspectives on like their model versus others. Like you made an important point, Jeff, which was like basically, let's talk through the pros and cons of each approach, and each approach has the pros and cons, but let's respect the other models and like try to be inclusionary, right? And so can you talk a bit more about that, because that seemed to be like a sort of lesson that you're sharing, right, with folks in the conversations.
The bigger lesson on any social media platform, and LinkedIn's no different, if you are going to put out commentary without context, then you have the ability to influence the uninformed, because there are a lot of people who could potentially read those comments without having any background context.
Okay.
All right. So now you're helping to falsely shape a narrative. And as I said, at very first part of this question, there's a lot of different models of open access, and what's good for one community may not be good for the next, right?
Yeah,
so, and my point there is that we shouldn't listen. A community is getting served, whether it's one open access model versus another open access model. We don't need to bash either one. We should be grateful that their infrastructure has been built and people are actually benefiting from it.
All right. I take a personal lesson from that. I tend to trash talk monopolies. I just think that they had their chance and everything, but I'll try to contextualize it a bit more with some research, and in the future is something I can do better on social media. I've got a follower, on Twitter, and I'll try to entertain that one follower, but that's cool. Well, that's good to hear. That's good advice.
Yeah, I know you've asked me this before, but why don't I have incumbent participation at Mount Connect? There are two reasons for that. I think one is I don't want to sell content influence, right? Because that's always a danger. And then the other reason is, 5 or so years ago, or maybe 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, we had a lot of contention in this, especially here in Colorado, with municipalities versus the incumbents. And oftentimes when they did participate, they get asked a lot of hard questions, and they didn't really take kindly to that. But it's my job is to bring everyone together. I can't control what happens once people get there. But I think in some ways that argument or that contention has gone away. And it's not that I would never welcome back an incumbent. Of course I would. I certainly would encourage them to come back. It's just I'm not interested in selling my content influence to anybody, which is why I have such a broadly focused agenda.
Right. Okay, spot on. So I'm going to roll over to some other topics from different questions in the community, Jeff, and I'm going to try my best to kind of broadly, bucket them. So, but I also have massive ADHD, as you probably know. So you might have some bounce around, all right? but we'll try our best. So Ben Kahn, who actually helped us connect this live stream, thanks Ben, from Broadband Breakfast, asks, in what ways has conversation surrounding broadband changed over the past decade, and how do you think this change has been reflected in Mountain Connect?
Well, that's a good question. So I, if you go back 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, certainly the content was around why is broadband important, and why should we
Interesting.
Why should we invest in infrastructure? And as you come forward a little bit, I think the conversations around public-private partnerships, which at the time I thought would have more merit to it than it seems to have today. There are still public-private partnership projects going on today, but I thought they would be at a much larger scale. And I can only speak for my event. I would say that the one thing that I try to do and with content is I don't like to go backwards, right? And we shouldn't in content. We should be what's relevant today, but more importantly, what's relevant in the next 3 to 5 years. So I feel as if it's my duty to challenge people with some of the content. So a really good example of 2018, I was probably the first broadband conference to have I was going to say Bitcoin, but the underlying technology of Bitcoin. Blockchain. Sorry, thank you. First one to have a meaningful discussion on what is blockchain and why is it important, and how may it impact our industry going forward. Now, that discussion may have been a little bit premature at the time, but here we are today. And I think you're going to start seeing more of this woven into, at least it should be, into content.
Okay.
Because it will have an impact. Same thing with telehealth.
Yeah.
Probably had one of the first telehealth conversations with respect to where telehealth and technology innovation was going. Right?
Where is it going? It's fascinating.
Diagnostic telehealth is a very fascinating subject to go and explore. And just to give you some context there, I think one of the things we need to do as an industry is bridge gaps where we have gaps with other industries. So before I had this session at Mountain Connect, there is a facility north of Denver that was constructed for telehealth technology innovators. Now, there are some mature companies in there as well, but I was invited for a tour. And when I went for a tour, I got to interview, 5 or 6 CEOs of these startups. And they all asked me the same question: why are you here? And why are you interested? And why should I care? Why should I care about having a conversation with you?
Broadband.
That's exactly what I told them. I said, you're developing some amazing technology here, but if it's not connected to a wired or wireless connection, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
Right. So I think content, like one of the other things I've been after for a long time are the folks from, I think I'll have next year, the folks from NEOM in Saudi Arabia, because what they're doing over there is going to be NEOM. So NEOM is a project funded by MBM over in Saudi Arabia. It'll be the world's first ground up smart megacity.
Holy smokes.
And so what they're doing over there from water conservation, healthcare, education, transportation, the use of robotics is absolutely fascinating. And at some point, those technologies will make their way here, and they will have a resounding impact on the way local governments are run. Some of the services that we have today are going to profoundly change. And I think
Right.
what they're doing there is going to be the blueprint for that.
Okay, Jeff. Well,
Probably a turn you weren't expecting me to take there.
not at all. I think that's really fascinating. I'm always hopeful to be a student of other models, and I feel like that's good that you mentioned that. Because we're pretty right now. We're kind of myopic on the U.S. just because of the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the land where the internet began. It's 2022. There's still tens of millions of people that have like either bad or no broadband. There's this historic moment where we actually, as a colleague said, like, all right, let's do this, let's fix it, right? And there's a bunch of whirlwind, something happening, in the next few years that hopefully can get to the bottom of the digital canyon in this country. And we need to still look around and look ahead, right? That's your message, is like, there's stuff going on over there that we're gonna see and be like, oh, well, now that we have broadband infrastructure in place here, like, check that out, right? That's cool. So Neon, maybe you got a Neon Connect up your sleeve somewhere in the future, but for now,
come out next year. So
let's, because of the moment, right, in our nation's history, right, like NTIA is about to do something pretty huge with the NOFOs, and you're going to be in the sort of post NOFO glow at Mountain Connect, right? And there's some really important folks coming to talk about the next steps. And so I would like to tailor a couple of minutes of this conversation, Jeff, if you would, about the programs. One is from Ben. It's, last week we sat down with Doug Dawson on an Ask Me Anything. And Doug, he strikes me as like somebody that's mostly an optimist. On the call, he described himself as a pessimist, though, when it comes to ensuring universal coverage through IJBEAD. And that contrasts with Alan Davidson's vision, right, and his commitment to what Congress set out, which is 100% access, right? So, how effective do you think BEAD funding will be in bridging the divide, and what pitfalls, if any, do you foresee as funding begins to get rolled out in the states?
Well, okay, so you're going to ask me a question where I'm probably going to give you a pessimistic answer.
That's okay.
So my biggest concern is that we repeat our own bad history.
Okay. In a nutshell, what did we do wrong in prior programs?
So I would say the biggest challenge for NTIA or any federal program is the fact that they lack enough qualified people to provide oversight.
Okay.
Right. And a lot of times, in a lot of cases, cost, I can tell you here in Colorado, part and parcel of the issue that we had with our BTAP grant was they underestimated the cost of building infrastructure. So there is a pass in Southwest Colorado that's being built. They're putting fiber over it now. This infrastructure cost $1 million a mile, which is very expensive, right? But if you think about the western slope of Colorado or eastern Utah or Montana or parts of Wyoming, you're talking about where you can't do things aerially. You're talking about boring through granite, and boring through granite is very costly. And so our BTOP grant actually ran out of money, and what was promised for fiber ended up being fixed wireless. And this is not a ding against fixed wireless, but as you might guess, when we got word that our BTOP grant had been approved, a lot of the rural communities on the western slope of Colorado, I lived in Durango at the time, our whole region started planning on ways that we could take advantage of that middle mile infrastructure. That BTOP grant was to connect all of our school districts in the state of Colorado. But it was an opportunity, if it was constructed, for rural communities to extend off of it, extend that infrastructure closer to the edge or to the edge. But when it became fixed wireless, that changed the game completely. And a lot of money ended up going to places it wasn't needed, like up in the greater Denver area.
Okay.
So what I don't want to see happen, and I realize that this money is geared towards the unserved and underserved.
Right.
What I don't want to see happen is it gets wasted because costs are being underestimated, and it's not going to the right people who can provide the right solutions. Because
Okay,
at the
this
end of
is
the
great.
day, the folks who are going to lose are the folks who live in those census blocks in those unserved and underserved areas of all states, not just Colorado.
I got you, Jeff. That's great advice. And I do want to say really quickly that what we're working on at Ready and Broadband Money in particular is like the ability to help local broadband partnerships, local pros get their share of the funding so that they can go out and roll up their sleeves and do more with less and provide a great subscriber experience. And also, that's a full life cycle commitment, right? If you take on those types of grants, as you pointed out, Jeff, there's a compliance component, right? So, the thought is though that software and not automation in the fullest sense, but semi-automation and reducing to the fullest possible extent the human in the loop for repeatable tasks like reporting, that those things can be aided by software. So you're right, Jeff, to say to the NTIA, like, one challenge that you faced in the past was like you didn't have enough people on hand to make sure that the money was, first of all, as Alan framed it in his cool talk that he did in DC a few weeks ago, like there's the phase of like where's the money going to go, right? And then there's the phase of where's the money going in the grants, and then the sort of post grant period of where did the money go. And I think that in every step you could see those groups benefiting from tools that help do more with less, right? And you make an excellent point there. Like it's going to take a ton of hard work and a bunch of really smart people like working their tails off for a long time to make sure that the money, this historic public investment, not only does it go everywhere that it should, but it does the most good that it could, right? Like that it's going to the highest and best use.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that the NTIA doesn't, or the federal government doesn't have enough staff to provide oversight. But let's not kid ourselves. A lot of the state government offices don't have enough people either. So,
right.
So if I go all the way back to the very beginning of this discussion, this is why the other thing I would say is that all states should take advantage of the planning funding as well, right? And hopefully they've identified key partners that can help them through that whole process, because it's going to make it more effective and efficient going forward if they've been able to do that.
Yeah, and like you said, Jeff, it's crazy to think that some states are actually looking to ignore the money.
Yeah,
like
but we only have 33 or 34 states that actually have an official broadband office or organization. And then you've got 16 or 17 that don't. I'll be curious to see like what happens in those states. Where
I'm from Missouri.
I'm sorry. It's the 16 or 17 states that prevent or have existing legislation that prevents municipal build outs. Sorry.
I'm from one of those states. I'm from Missouri. There's still talk going on right now. If you go to discuss.broadband.money, there was a recent post about like there's still like even new legislation being proposed to essentially preempt preemption in their minds. This is what they're trying to do, but it's like it's incumbent protectionism, it's regulatory capture at its worst. It's holding folks in Missouri back, and it's total BS, right? So that's an important message, Jeff. And to your point about resources, that applies to the state level. Okay, so all right, so we've got about 20 minutes left, Jeff. So I'm going to continue to roll through some of these awesome questions that have come in from folks. Theodora asks, oh, did I lose I think I lost my place. One second. I think I ran out of the question. TJ asks, how should states and policymakers team up with the private sector? That's it. I love that question. Should they, right, in your mind? You said partners. Do you mean specific sectors, like only nonprofits, or for-profits part of the conversation? I would add a should to TJ's question. So TJ asks, how should states and policymakers team up with the private sector? And my question on top of that is like, should they?
Yeah, absolutely, they should. Yeah, I mean, I don't see how they can be successful going at this alone. Now, if I'm proven wrong, then great. But I just don't see how that's plausible,
Right.
given the enormity of the task in front of them.
Given the enormity of the task in front of you, find the partners, and it's okay to work with the private sector. And in fact, we research the crap out of providers in this landscape, and our view is clear, and we're releasing reports on this in the coming months, that there's a huge bifurcation between the monopolies that probably deserve to have the lowest net promoter score of any industry, right? Like I'm not going to name names, but if you think of the word ISP, you think of some of those names, and you'll think of like a sort of hatred probably in some people's cases, but there's a bifurcation between that cohort, right? And then the cohort that's like, they're just local, they're in the community, they roll up the sleeves, they've been at it, they're WISPs, they're fiber providers, right? They're telcos, like they sponsor the Little League, their kids go to the same school as yours, they're actually in, the same, community with you. And that's an important point to add to that. So that's cool. Okay, Thea's question. How do you think we can get more services in rural areas?
Well, we're about to find out, aren't we? We're about, listen, if all this money doesn't solve the lion's share of the issues we face in rural America, then we have really taken a couple steps backwards.
Okay.
There's absolutely no reason.
I dig that.
There's no reason why this money could not solve what she's implying in that was a lady, right? I'm sorry if that.
Yeah, Theodore, yeah.
Yeah. So what she's implying in that, by asking that question, this money should solve a majority of our rural issues if it's used correctly.
Totally dig that. Okay, good. Next question is from Dave Todd. He says, years ago, Plume hired one of the core devs, Michael Kezior, of the FQ Codal for Wi-Fi code. So far, they've not deployed that to their customers or smart queue management. What's taking so long? The STD APIs have been in the Linux kernel for 5+ years now. Originally, y'all have great statistics about how bad Wi-Fi can get, and what's Plume doing about it. So this is an interesting technical question from.
Well, I can't answer the first part of the question because I don't know who this person is.
Okay.
And I know nothing of the FQ Codal for Wi-Fi code. I don't know what that is. So it'd be unfair for me to even try to attempt to answer that question.
Understood.
But I if you look at, we have the most adaptive managed Wi-Fi solution in the industry right now. We just surpassed 40 million premises this past week. Oh. And we have in a neighborhood of somewhere between 1 and 3 billion devices connected to Plume pods across the globe, right? So we obviously capture a lot of analytics, a lot of data, but I think so our solution is adaptive, which means if you, like here in my office where I'm at, I have a pod right over here. You can't see that, but if I should get signal interference for whatever reason, or the quality of the service on that pod is not functioning properly, it will move me to another pod or another channel.
Right.
I won't even know it's doing that until service quality has been restored on that particular pod. The other thing about Plume is that we do not have necessarily a proprietary solution. So we're using OpenSync. So we're a SaaS company, right?
OpenSync.
Yeah. And you're not locked in. By using Plume, you're not vendor locked. So what that means is that you can get OpenSync on AdTran, utilizing AdTran's products, DZS, Sykesel, there's a very large list. So that provides more options for our customers and prospective customers, because they don't have to be locked into Plume. They've got a lot of different options to choose from. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. And was there a second part of that question?
Yeah, it was about the
Oh, so how bad
what are you
Wi-Fi
going to
is
do?
bad? Okay, so,
Yeah.
so let's take a little time to talk about that. That's an interesting comment, because there are two things, or there are a handful of things we should think about. One is, the industry doesn't really talk about this enough, that there are two distinctly different networks serving a home: the one on the outside of the home, and a completely different one on the inside of the home, right?
Okay.
Consumers, unfortunately, are not getting technically smarter. I would say that we're going in the opposite direction, right? So
Yeah.
today, most consumers would not understand why they're having a poor Wi-Fi experience. Now, the technical savvy ones will figure it out, right? But most people don't understand it. And so here's the thing: there are many things that could I'm sorry, I can't speak, could create a bad Wi-Fi experience. One is, you could have outdated devices and not know it.
Okay.
Right? You could have signal interference or degradation and not understand that either. You could have, think about the way Adobe homes are constructed. They might as well be a Faraday cage.
Right.
Mesh. Because of all the wire mesh inside the wall, and the older ones being as thick as they are. Right. So there are a lot of mitigating circumstances as to why Wi-Fi is poor. And so it's not, so I hopefully that sort of addresses that question. It's not as simple as saying, oh, I have really crappy service. The problem for consumers, because they don't understand, is that the perception of the quality of the network that's inside their home actually is the perception for the entire network serving that home, right? It's just poor, right?
Okay, I dig that, Jeff. That's really good perspective. And I love how you framed it. There are two networks. There's the network that runs up to your place, right? And then there's the network within your place, right?
Yep.
And you're absolutely right that the quality of experience is going to be judged, right, through the lens from the most consumers' perspective, not by like what's showing up on the side of the place. It's what's being experienced on the specific device at the specific time, and that can be highly variable. And that is why the Talented Ready team, we built our own active measurement system to take into account the QoE of the end user device. You can go and test it out at wi-fi.wtf.
Yeah, well,
that stands for.
Yeah, I know what that stands for. I think. You could go back 3 or 4 years, and if you would have called your provider and said, I have my Wi-Fi is crap in my house.
Did you unplug your router?
They would say, well,
if
you plug in your computer to your router and test it there, then you tell us what that is.
Yeah.
Right? So if it's anywhere near what you're paying for, they're just going to wave a flag at it. But today you can't really do that, because, as you just alluded to there, we have taught people to connect wirelessly, and if any part of our industry is going to expect people to wire their homes, are crazy. I won't even wire my house, because it's going to cost a lot of money, and I don't see the value in it, right? Now, consumer, the general consumer is simply not going to do that, and they are going to continue to connect wirelessly, because that's what they know, right? And so the experience, then, the quality of the service inside the home has to go deeper than the router. It needs to go to the device level, because that is truly what the consumer is experiencing.
Damn straight. Dave in the community that asked that question too, he's part of the Broadband Innovation Technical Advisory Group, the Bike Tag, and he talks a lot about what he calls buffer bloat, right? And it's the difference, the delta between like, a, a a latency that's working versus non-working. It definitely goes over my head, a lot of it, but I do have to ask you, like, what do you know about that, like latency? And it's in all these states, all the national stuff. The Congress is like, yeah, like make sure that it's 100/20 up down and or 25/3, and that was like, encased in that definition. But then other people, they're looking at it like, wait a minute, like that's only a part, and a small part at that, right? Throughput is a small part of the overall QoE and the application potential, right? So can you talk a bit about latency, and can you fix my Wi-Fi?
I could if you have better equipment in your house. Just kidding.
No, I
Well, the
don't.
one thing I would
I
say
got a
about
trash provider. There's no strong local provider where I'm based. So you
well, the one
definitely
thing I
come
would
in
say
and
about latency again is it's something that's really a factor on the outside of the home, right? So, the problem again is wirelessly connected devices and the network inside the home. So I think there's some hope on the horizon, right? So we have we still have Wi-Fi 5 devices out there, but we now have 6, and we have 6E, and 7 is not far behind. And when we get to 7, Wi-Fi 7 is supposed to Wi-Fi 7 is supposed to help with the issue that we have with having equitable distribution of capacity inside a premise, right? So if I'm in my basement, or I'm upstairs in my office, or I'm downstairs, I should really have the same speed test experience, right? So if I'm getting, I'm just making this number up, 700 meg down in my basement and 700 meg in my family room, I should get 700 meg. And it's important. I say this because it's really important to think about this. If you look at where future technology applications are going to take this discussion, having that ubiquitous distribution of capacity is going to be so important, because consumers use multiple applications at the same time. So it's the aggregate use of these applications that are coming, where what I just described will be really important to enhance the consumer experience using those applications.
awesome. I think to that point, Jeff, too, that part of what Dave's group's working hard on is that it's sort of a cumulative latency that does include the latency that gets lumped in from the internal network, right, as you framed it. But we're almost out of time, and you've got your treasure trove of knowledge for the industry, Jeff. So I'd like to shift gears into another question, back to the funding, right? And I know you're a Michiganian by birth.
Michigander.
Michigander. Y'all Eminem is Michigander.
Yeah, Michigander.
I've always thought it was Michiganian.
No.
I need to go back to Eminem school, I guess. But in this case, like, never mind that. You live in Colorado, and you think about Colorado a lot, right?
Yeah.
And Colorado's awesome. Colorado leads the pack in a lot of awesome things in broadband. And this is a question from Sarah Lai Sterlin, who asked, hi Jeff, how do you think the IJA will impact Colorado? And which areas do you think need the most help from the connectivity perspective? And then she's got a follow-up, but those are two important quick questions.
So, well, hopefully it has a measurable impact on Colorado, and a positive impact. And I think, well, historically, there's been two areas: the Eastern Plains, and certainly the Western Slope. The Western Slope is always going to be where help is needed, and it's a multi-layered challenge out there, right? Because not only do we have communities that are still being served by copper, which is steadily improving, but building inside of those communities is, again, very expensive if you don't have access to poles. But the other challenge, of course, is getting access to redundant and abundant middle mile infrastructure.
Redundant, abundant middle mile.
Right, because that last mile investment, you could argue, is like putting the cart before the horse, because if you can't get out, or you can't get out reliably, I can't tell you how many stories that have been written over the last 5 to 10 years about a community being cut off because a backhoe cut fiber. So
Yeah.
for a whole day, a community's locked out from credit card transactions, etc. Right? So
Yeah.
that's why, well, and even 911 services, right? These are all really important considerations. And why middle mile?
Yeah, they melt.
What's that?
They melt, right? Y'all have y'all had
can.
some fiber fires that have melted into the ground, even, right?
Yeah.
Like, I was sketching up with you work with the talented Doug Adams to produce Mountain Connect, and we met Lori Adams. His I think she's probably his better half in a lot of respects, and she was telling me about the fires that y'all had recently, and that they had actually melted some of the fiber underground, or caused the situation where the fiber underground like failed, and it led to, because there wasn't the redundant, abundant access that you described, that it resulted in a failure of the sort of emergency networks and responses, and that's terrifying.
Right.
Right. So IJA includes not just BEAD. BEAD's like, of course, the flagship, but it's got a dedicated middle mile program. Even aspects of BEAD seem like they're going to be applicable to, strengthening and fortifying middle. And so that's a part of it. And, so she asked the second question too, Jeff, of what do you see as the nature of the digital divide in Colorado? You touched on this in the sort of geographic context, but is there any more to that you can add?
On the digital divide?
Yeah, the nature of the digital divide in Colorado. Like, what is it? Is it haves, have nots, wills, will nots, cannot?
Well, I don't know. I think this has changed over the last year or two, but digital divide has always been thought of as a rural issue, but when in fact it's not. We have communities in and around large metropolitan areas that are underserved because of demographics, and it has a huge impact. It has a huge impact on many different facets of the way people live their lives, especially today. So if you can't, during the pandemic, if you couldn't work from home, or you couldn't school yourself from home, or you couldn't, you had your only access to rudimentary medical care was through telehealth, and you couldn't connect to that. Amongst all the other things that people use the internet for, I do happen to think that this is a much bigger problem. Then, of course, we have areas in large cities where people don't speak English.
Okay.
Right. So that's yet another challenge, where you find that the fact that they don't speak natively, they don't speak English, and perhaps they're demographically challenged or economically challenged, that brings up a whole nother concern, right? Very similar to the first one I described, but nonetheless a completely different challenge in some aspects of looking at it. And how do you actually tackle that and solve that problem?
Okay, awesome. So that also ties back full circle to your thought process on why you make Mountain Connect so inclusive, Jeff, because I know that on Wednesday there's a keynote panel on innovations in digital inclusion, right? You've got some amazing folks there. You got the talented Scott Woods from NTIA, Paulo from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and they're doing all kinds of important work on this space. And Josh from Detroit, and it's just.
So if I could just stop you there for a second, I think for anyone interested in learning how to solve a digital equity issue, come listen to Josh's what the city Detroit's going to be doing.
Yeah, that's please do. Yeah, and you just touched on something that was like, well, language is part of that, right? It's an assumption that English on interfaces, programs, applications, right? So we built turnkey ACP, and I don't know if any of the Ready team, if you're listening or if you're building stuff in code right now, but if you're listening, like, think about what Jeff just said, right? access starts with like, understanding, right? And it's hard to understand in a language that you don't speak or read natively. So that was awesome. We have one more minute, Jeff. I've got one last surprise question for you because you've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. It's coming from a community member, Jay, and he asked, "What the F is the internet? What is it? What is it to you?"
Well, why would you ask me this question?
You know me, man.
I think it's a hard thing to answer because it's changing, right? It's changing
Okay.
again. I don't know if you follow what's going on with Internet 3, or is that what they're calling it? Internet 3?
Web3?
Web 3. Web 3.0.
Yeah, but synonymous. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's changing. It'll be interesting to see what to answer that question. I'm going to not answer it by saying that I'm interested to see how Web 3.0 has influence in terms of how we use the internet today. People use the internet for everything. When I was in Spain a month ago, I was using Google Translate, right, to translate menus, right?
In real time, right?
Yeah, in real time. People use it obviously for communication, for connecting with family, social media, for research, for all sorts of things, for shopping, right? Reviews for products. I know I spend a lot of time before I purchase a car, for example. I'll spend a boatload of time on YouTube watching review videos from around the world, just so I can
Totally
get
dig it.
a full perspective before I go and make sure that I'm not missing anything.
Your video head.
10 or 15 years ago, you couldn't do that, right? But it's very useful. So I'm hoping that what is promised in Web 3.0 actually comes to fruition over time, because I think it could drastically change the way that we use the internet.
All right, Jeff, it was awesome to hang out with you, man. Community, if you have any follow-up questions for Jeff, he's plugged into the Ask Me Anything page where we're hosting this event today. 2 quick reminders too. If you haven't yet secured your spot at Mountain Connect, you probably need to do so pretty fast because there's some important announcements coming even next week. It's probably not one that you want to miss, okay? And it's the week after the largest, like I said, single day event in the history of broadband, right? With NTIA dropping the NOFO. And I mean, you heard from Jeff, like it's going to be an all around awesome environment. So, make sure you sign up mountainconnect.org. And then 2, this Ask Me Anything series, Jeff, thank you for making time today. I know you're busy.
My pleasure, Jason.
It's an ongoing series with thought leaders and industry luminaries like Jeff. Next week we have Jim Ballard. It's pretty much an OG of community networks. Definitely don't want to miss that. We've got Chet Kanoja coming up. He's the CEO of Starry, May 13th, right? And has built one of the fastest growing providers of all time. We're going to ask him, how the hell did you do that? So keep in tune and join us. And we look forward to seeing you. And thank you again, Jeff, for all you do for broadband.
Oh, no, thank you very much. It was my pleasure to be here. I hope it was helpful.
Definitely was for me. I don't know about the rest of y'all.